So how do I invest personally so that we're worth over $5 million? And how am I figuring out various different aspects to continue this ball rolling while still making, right now, multi-million-dollar real estate investment? And so this is a question a couple of you guys had hit me up on Instagram on my personal account, Ghostface D Milla. Now, one of the big factors here that I want to cover is that it's important to think through the lens of how risky each and every single aspect is going to be. And I like to think through this as far as like a storyline, right? You're going to have your high risk things that are going to be like the end of the road, big time, risky capabilities that you want to try to take advantage of. But to get there, to get to that super risky moment, you have to just make these simple decisions along the way, these simple unlocks to build into those big time investments, which are that big risky end of the road, super huge pipe dream that we might get in some type of video game, right? I'm thinking about Final Fantasy VII. So when we're going through this, the big factor for me is first making sure that we had 6 to 8 months of an emergency fund. Okay, so we put this into Lending Tree and another high yield savings account. And then one of those other big factors that you could be doing is investing in treasury bills, treasury bonds. So treasury bills, something like a 13-week treasury bill, like 91 to 93 days, something like that. Or you can go a little bit longer and say, hey, I want a 20-year bond, treasury bond, or a 30-year treasury bond. And those are some simple, lower risk things that you can do. But for me personally, what we do is we just put it into a high yield savings at this moment. That can change though over time. Now, the other big factor here is making sure that all of our debt is allocated accordingly and that anything that is high interest has been paid down as much as possible so that there's a strategic move that we can say, okay, we had a building that was an 11% interest rate. It was a variable interest rate. We tried to pay that off much quicker, whereas we have another mortgage right now that's at a 4%. And it's, $35,000 is left on the actual mortgage. So we're not even trying to pay it off. We're paying it monthly, but we're not trying to do anything rapidly. So we're trying to think through that lens as well. Then the next factor that we do is we sit here and say, okay, now I've got the high yield savings. Okay, we actually have 12 months of a high yield savings was our emergency fund. Then the next thing, every year putting into the Roth IRA. So, and then trying to do a backdoor Roth as well with that so that we can increase that long term. Okay, so that's the next big factor. We use Vanguard. If I were you guys, I would do this 100% every single year. Set up the high yield savings, set up that Roth. Okay, now what I want to get into with stocks is as I've built through this, and then we have another retirement fund through our company, a SEP IRA because we are self-employed. So in the SEP, we max that out. I think that's like $18K total a year that we're allowed to put in there. And we just max the shit out of it. And we match 3% of that from our company. So that's another big factor that everybody who has some type of match from their company should be doing this 100%. Okay. And then you should be the one who controls where that money is being invested. That's a big factor that a lot of people don't realize is that you can control that as long as you're in the right contract. Now, the next thing for myself is on this risk level, okay, on this level of risk is I initially came in and I said, all right, I have a lot of capital and I want to, turn up the dial a little bit. We paid off of a lot of our loans or a lot of our mortgages. We set up that emergency fund. And then after we set up that emergency fund, then we set up all of our retirement stuff and we've got that dialed in. After the retirement stuff is factored in, we know our budgeting expenses on a monthly basis from a family perspective. And then the next step is, okay, how do I want to invest this? Okay, so I think there's a couple big factors. And I think this is where people have errors is like people don't recognize that a company. So if you look at growth stocks, those are high risk. Okay, crypto, high risk currently. I think that's starting to diminish because of this Genius Act, Clarity Act. Okay, at least the right crypto. And then if you look at dividends, a dividend stock, much lower risk, and then a value stock, really, really low risk. Okay, so I try to identify what would be a growth compartment. Okay, and I look at ETFs, I look at stocks, I look at crypto, and I think, okay, this is growth over here. And then I look at what's dividend, okay? So I look at ETFs, I look at stocks, and I'm saying, okay, Home Depot, Costco, those are dividend stocks, okay? ETFs, SCHD, that's a dividend ETF. So that's a really simple play. Technically, Meta is a dividend stock. And then I look at value, okay? So what does value mean? Think Berkshire Hathaway. Think just investing in the S&P 500. Every single year, you're going to get between 6 and 12% growth on an average basis. You should expect, let's just say 6 to 10% growth on an average basis. So that's a value play that's low risk. You're going to get a good return. It's not going to go to the moon, but it's going to be something that you need to play long term. And if we're in this for the right reasons, we're thinking through this lens, and we're thinking what's happening every 5 years, okay? And I want to think what's happening every 5 years strategically, because I'm playing 30, 40 years, right? Even longer. So as long as I'm alive, right? And as long as my kids are using what I'm trying to set up. So if we're looking at that, we have growth, value, dividend, and it's growth, value, dividend, stocks, ETFs, and then any other financial play. So here's where I get interesting with how I view things. I look at stocks like Meta, stocks like Google. I believe now Nvidia, which just crossed the $4 trillion market cap, is going to get into this. Google might be a little bit different, actually. I should take that back. But I look at Meta as the play of a value stock. Okay, I genuinely believe it is so big, and its business is so well established, and they've proven time and time again that they're going to make good decisions all the time with the way that they invest, with the way that they strategically move things around, the way that they handled Instagram, the way they've handled WhatsApp, the way they've handled hiring these people from OpenAI. I believe wholeheartedly that Meta is actually a freaking value stock. So what I try to do is I'll sit here and I go, okay, so my easy plays are I try to put a percentage, and that's around 55 to 60% into ETFs, and I just want a value play, I want a dividend play, okay? So I have VU and I have SCHD. I use Vanguard, you can use whatever you want, but VU is just the S&P 500, and that's my simple play. That's my play that's gonna keep me alive. It's when I start to get hit, it's gonna keep me stable, okay, this entire time. Then I have SCHD, and that's gonna be, it's down big time right now, but that's still a long-term play, long-term value play, and it's a dividend ETF, okay? Now, here's where I've started to really shift the way I think about things is now I'm taking this and I'm adding Meta into that realm. I believe in the future because NVIDIA's growth, eventually it's going to slow down quite a bit, and they're such a large, stable firm that it's like probably would shift in there. I'm adding Meta's percentage in there because I believe even if it gets to $2,000 in the next 4 years, which is probably likely, it's still a value play. Meaning it's stable. It will look at what has happened since 2008 and how much Facebook has gone through and been able to handle all of these various storms. They've proven their track record. They've proven it. They've been through multiple different huge events, and they've come out on the other side. So why are we continuously, just because they're a company, afraid to invest in them long term? They've proven it. And I think that's the thing, like we'll look at Berkshire Hathaway and think that, but then Meta, we don't think that. And I think that's actually, and maybe it's a little too aggressive, maybe it's a little bullish, but that's the way I'm playing it. So if I look at Meta, if I look at ETFs like VU and SCHD, then that's my simple long-term play. Okay, now when I look at crypto and when I look at the stocks I'm investing in, when I look at other stocks, okay, I think about crazy growth, high volatility. Think about SoFi. Think about, right now AMD doesn't have crazy, it's growing like crazy. But I look at stocks in two different factors, and I'll put in, let's say 15 to 20% of my money and say, okay, now I'm looking at these stocks that are a little bit riskier, and I'm willing to take the risk as long as I do the research, as long as I look at their 2-year forward PE, as long as I look at the sentiment around it, as long as I look at the CEO who's running it, and I think through the lens, like, this is going to be okay. And I look at a stock like SoFi, it's up and down like crazy, okay? AMD, we were buying back in March and April. It's off the freaking charts, and I'm going to keep buying all the way up to 200. And so I look at those, and those are my risk plays. Now, I also look for beaten down stocks. So if I look at a beaten down stock, now I'm looking at something like Nike, okay, ELF. These are stocks that were beaten down, and ELF up and down, but it's gone up, I want to say over 100% since I came in February. So ELF is something that's been beaten down for a while, and now it's starting to make some really good strategic decisions. Nike has been beaten down for 5 years plus, and they're making some really good decisions, and I think they're going to start to grow. Another stock that I'm thinking through right now that I haven't pulled the trigger on, I've talked about in the past, would be Adobe. Okay, so that's another one. Google is not in that same realm. I would shift Google over into the AMD realm. And so now, as I look through all these, and I'm thinking off the top of my head, I've got AMD, I've got Meta, I've got Google, I've got Amazon is another one that will eventually likely shift into that value play because it's so big and they have so many different entities to help stabilize their growth. Eventually they will get in there probably in the very near future, the same way that I think about Meta and Nvidia. So as I start to work through this, right, and I'm looking at something like Palantir, a little bit riskier. We have to see how the next year goes. It's growing like crazy, but we have to just play that out. Now I can look at this and I say, okay, these are my values. These are my values / dividend, okay? These are my lower risk plays. These are my higher risk plays, which I would put SoFi, ELF, Nike into that. These are my like moderate risk plays, AMD, Google, Palantir in there. And then that's how I think moving forward. And then now I look at things, I try to stay up to date with the market. And I look at, okay, with what's happening with the Genius Act and the Clarity Act and the stablecoin work is like, okay, I believe stablecoins are actually going to be a huge change in the financial system. And we have to start looking at companies that are going to be using stablecoins, issuing stablecoins, creating hardware for stablecoins. And then there's eventually going to be some stablecoin boom, some stablecoin bust, long-term, very long-term. But if we're recognizing this, we have to look at those other companies that are going to be getting in there. And at the meantime, looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum predominantly, okay? Basically, everything's going to be built on Ethereum because all these companies are going to be US-based companies that are going to be issuing stable coins. Okay, so if all these companies are going to be US-based stablecoin companies, think about Amazon's going to come in here. They're going to create some type of hardware. Google is going to create some type of hardware and software. Amazon's going to create some type of software. So Facebook is going to get into this. So we have to think through that play, okay? And when we're looking at that, it's like buying the actual, for me personally, this isn't financial advice. This is just me talking through. I'm looking at it through, all right, Ethereum, I'm probably going to make some more investments. Even if it gets to $5,000, I don't give a shit. It can get to $6,000. I don't give a shit. I'm going to still put money into it because I see this thing. Tom Lee just talked about this 2 days ago. It's going to be $30,000 in a year. He's putting so much freaking money into Ethereum, and he's growing the consistency around it and the sentiment around it because he's so bought into it with Bitmine immersion and with Fundstrat. So as far as Ethereum is concerned, I'm investing in Ethereum. I'm investing in Bitcoin. And the reason why I'm not putting a ton of money into Bitcoin, I'm not putting a ton of money in there. I'm putting about 10% right now. And I will say this is that traditionally we've seen it be, hey, you put in 10% and you say, just said hi to this guy. You put in 10%, okay, of what you have. So let's say every month you can invest $1,000. That would be $100. I would bump that up to 15% now because of the stablecoin stuff. Personally, I'm bumping that up to 15% because I believe now if I stay in Bitcoin and Ethereum and then I'm using like maybe one off project for me that I've already sort of selected and I'm researching the other ones. Now I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, Bitcoin's the stabilizer. Ethereum is the actual system that everything's going to be built upon. So that's sort of the way I look at it. And I'm actually starting to think long term, what's going to happen with gold and what's going to happen with silver? Is it going to go up, or is the stable coin stuff going to go down? Is it going to cause it to go down? And then how long is it going to take for all this stuff to play out and to have something like our large debt actually be impacted in will we see, once the stablecoin stuff starts to play, will we see deficit drop? I'm interested to see how all that stuff plays out. So all of those things are the inner workings of my investments, okay? But then I also have my real estate stuff on the side where I have these side things, and this is what you could be doing with treasury bills. This is what we're personally doing, is we have our money over here that we have allocated separately towards real estate. And that's where we sort of play with this space for real estate, this space for the investments, this space for our personal growth. And then as we grow that over and over again, we just keep making strategic decisions and playing that game of risk. And the high risk plays right now are for us is SoFi. It is probably ELF. Those are the highest risk that I have. And then I don't even think cryptos. I actually think ELF and SoFi are probably more risky than buying Bitcoin and Ethereum, 100%. So I wanted to share this as a way for the way that we think through it. My wife and I think through this, and how I go through where we're dishing everything out. We meet at the beginning of every single month, and we have our percentages set up, and then strategically we alter it quarterly based off of what we're thinking's happening. So, and I think when you sit down and you think through all these processes, it really does pay, because you start to make decisions that are more educated, and you understand what's happening. You start to understand things like the bond market, which I had no understanding of 3 years ago. I had no understanding about all this stuff 3 years ago, but it's helped me really just by playing out, thinking through the pieces, what's involved with everything, and then how we can help ourselves and our children and our dreams, our passions really come to fruition. So I hope I help somebody else out there, a normal person. Peace.